women started becoming a problem for me early on in my life, and it wasn't like the number of women or anything like that. That wasn't because I wasn't really into that sort of lifestyle, but I always seemed to pick the wrong ones. Was generally the key, and I think it was because I had such a hard time, myself growing up. I always somehow attracted women that were in trouble themselves in some way in their past or their lives, and not all of them, but some of them were just a goddamn mess. And I've always wanted to help people because I always felt that I didn't get any myself. A lot of the times when I really needed it, I didn't get anything from anybody, not in my career and my personal life. And some people that could have helped me were just powerless to do so. But there were others who could have done something for me that just chose not to do it for whatever reason. I never understood that, and I probably never will. But I'd started dating a girl in Bridgewater, actually, just before I had moved to the first time down to the States, and lied my ass off about how old I was. And took a little while for her to find out. She was 2 years older than me. She was of drinking age, and I wasn't. And but for that matter, I was going into bars and drinking from the age of 15. I think nobody ever knew how old I was. I looked a lot older than I was, and carried myself older than I was. And I don't think I was ever ID'd going into a bar in my lifetime ever. So yeah, so that was going on, and I kind of left her behind there when I went to the States, and figured that was 17, 16, 17 years old, wasn't really that concerned with long term relationships. That didn't know what they were really in that time. I did, I understood that. It's funny, you get your values from your parents. My mother and father fought like cats and dogs, but they were married for 32 years, and as far as we know, everybody was, faithful to each other. And I don't know. I mean, it was just when Dad died, my mother just completely shut that part of her life off. There was no other man for her, and that was it. And she died alone. So, like, that was, of course, she was still living at this time, but you get your values from watching those things, So, I kind of went into the world of matters of the heart, prepared to make commitments to people, and one of my biggest downfall in my life was always thinking that people would treat me the way I treated them. And if that because I wouldn't do something horrendous, that other people wouldn't do it either. Like, that was a bad. And I was guilty of that right well into my 40s, before I started to realize that you couldn't self-assure that because you're not capable of doing this, that the other person's not capable of doing it either. You should never superimpose your own values into somebody else, no matter who they are. And so I kind of remember now, if when I look back on that first trip, it lasted around a year. I think it was the first run I made at it, and so as I said in the last episode, being in the South, I was surrounded by people who based their entire lives upon their family. No matter how dysfunctional it might be and how screwed up some of the people were inside these families, they had this bizarre loyalty, even, in the face of, cutting some of the people in their life up behind their back. They would still literally kill and die for them. and marriage was sacred, in most of those groups, most of the people that I was meeting down there, like marriage was forever. Children would be involved, and like there was just a set of values. As things progressed, I started to find out that there was a lot of things going on we didn't know about, but most of the people that I was meeting down there were just very, very family oriented, and I started to see the value in it. I started to see at an early age. I was looking at this and going, these people aren't just married; they're helping each other do things. There's way more going on here than just a marital relationship. This guy couldn't do this without his wife, and vice versa. The wife has couldn't do the things that she's doing without him being there. And there was a lot of really strong partnerships that I was witnessing. Even though, as I said already, some of them were really warped. The way that Enoch and Margie worked. They she had his back, and he had hers. But there was a lot of darkness there. Like why it was almost, I don't know quite how to explain it, but there was a lot of darkness in their relationship. I never seen them, in all the time I knew them, ever display any affection towards one another, ever. Never seen them kiss, not even a peck on the cheek, nothing. They had zero physical relationship in public, which was really weird. But you could tell that like Margie would always like kind of walk over to Enoch and massage his. He had a big, powerful shoulders and neck, and she'd walk over there and rub his hump. We called it his Brahma hump on his back, and that sort of thing. That was the extent of their public physical relationship. They just didn't do. They were very proper, and it was So I was watching all these dynamics, and then I was getting to be that age. Like I spent most of when I was in school, most of the guys I knew by the time I was in grade 10, they had girlfriends. They were going to the dances. They were doing this and that. I never got involved in any of that. I never went to a school dance in my life because I didn't have a girlfriend and I didn't want one. I was completely absorbed with music. Music was everything. And like I say, it wasn't until I was 17 years old that I finally decided to give it a shot. And coincidentally, what was really funny was the way I met the first girl I ever dated. Somebody, I don't know who it was, decided to fix me up. And they took me to a house party to this girl's house. And it was that girl I was supposed to go out with. But instead, I fell for her friend, which was not planned. That was really funny. After the party, with everybody expecting me to call this first girl, but instead I found out who this other girl was, and yeah, so that was funny and cute and all that stuff. But down in Alabama, like I said earlier, we were running around all over the southern United States, like everywhere, from Texas to the southern tip of Florida, all the way up into Kentucky, the Carolinas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Tennessee. Even played a show up in Michigan. We had this the whole southeastern corner of the United States from Oklahoma east. We were working that whole corridor. And I'm telling you what, buddy, there was some beautiful women in that place, and there still is. There's something about Southern women that is just ridiculous. Mostly because I think now, when I look back on it, I think it's because and this has to do with religion. They were raised in those type of families where the women were taught, how to take care of a man. It's a different value system. They weren't like the ones that I was meeting in my own age and even in their 20s. it wasn't like, I don't mean that to be like, they weren't subservient. They were all really capable. These women could hunt, fish, drive, build. Wouldn't care what. They could do anything. These women were tough as hell. And, but they were trained somehow to, to, I don't know, to create that family unit. And they managed to still be completely autonomous, but still had that strange, that what is strange now, really, that value of, okay, I'm running the house here and I'm going to take care of this man and these children, but I'm also going to go out and do my career, and I'm going to ride motorcycles, and I'm going to hunt and fish, and I'm building a cabin in the backyard, and I'm doing, like, they were super capable people. And but they had that value system instilled in them through watching their parents and through, the Bible. One of the things that is bad, about what they preach down there is the subservience of women, which didn't really take. Thank God for that. Except for this one kind of thing that they had, right? They were all just really geared towards being a matriarch. That was, they knew how to do it. And sometimes I don't even know if it really was like taught, in quotations, that it seemed to be inbred in them, like just instilled in them somehow. So the family units down there were really tight and cool to be around. Like there was a great dynamic amongst most of the families that I came into contact with during my years down there. And so there was I met this girl in a church in Florida, and I just suddenly fell head over heels for her. Don't even know why. I just did. It was just something about her and her family. It was something about that too. It's like I wasn't. I really loved her mother and father. They were great people, and it was weird. It was like, okay, that you at that point in my life, and maybe a lot of other people down there, you weren't just shopping for a partner. You were looking at the whole family. I could start to understand why fathers would look at their daughters and go, okay, well, yeah, you're dating so-and-so, so who are his people? And vice versa. Fathers would ask their sons, oh, yeah, what's her name? Oh, yeah, who's her people? Who's her father? And all this, like, I started to see why that was important. And because you're marrying into potentially hundreds of people. And I somehow, nobody even really told me any of this. I just, when I ran into that girl in that church, that gig, and met her folks, and there was just something about it, about them, her, whole deal. And we started communicating with each other by phone and letter and all this stuff while we were touring, and things were going really well in the band, and blah blah blah. And one morning we were driving home overnight from a gig in the station wagon, just me and Enoch and Margie. I think Bobby Hawthorne was there, maybe, too, playing banjo. And we're going down the interstate, and the sun's coming up. I was in the back seat behind Enoch, and I sat up, popped my head over his shoulder. I said, "Hey, Pop." And he used to make fun of me all the time, my accent and all this stuff. So he'd tell people his story and just laugh his ass off. And I'd say, "Hey, Pop, do you think I could go down to Florida for a few days?" And he said, "You want to go see that little girl, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I really want to go down and see. I really need, And of course, being a 17-year-old kid, I was just like, everything was, if I don't see her, I'm going to die, all that shit, right? and he, him and his wisdom understood exactly what was going on. So I don't even remember how I got down there, but they got me down there. Somebody drove me all the way down to mid Florida. I won't say where they were, but they halfway down the state and dropped me off there, and I stayed with them for, I don't know, a couple of weeks or a week or something like that. And I had a blast. I had a blast down there with them. They lived on a lake. The father took me out bass fishing. We played music. We ate food. I got food poisoning and almost died at one point from God knows what. I don't know what happened, but something horrible happened to me. I was sick for about 2 days, and then it just me and the girl, we just got along, famous, and these people just took me in, completely took me in, and so so this I don't really remember how long it went on. I went back home to Enix and went back on the road, and I saw her a few more times. She had family, I think, in Louisiana, and I saw her over there for a while, and then things started to heat up. There's the courtships down there are fast, right? And proper, right? There was a lot of proper etiquette in the South, and so the whole family came up to St. Stephen's to Enix Festival. He held a festival basically in his backyard in this beautiful bluegrass park he had back there, and it was a really cool festival. It wasn't heavily attended or anything, but it was good, and they had good bands came down, and that's where I started to run into the Meharry family, Paul Meharry and his family. I'll get into that later. That was a whole thing. Another chapter. And so they all came up, the girl and her family, grandparents, everybody came up, hauled a motorhome up, and there was whisperings, about marriage. Are these kids going to make a go of this? And where will they live? And this was actually happening, right? And there was no ring or anything. I hadn't proposed to anybody or anything like that. But it was obvious that there was a closeness with everybody. And so they come up to the festival, and her father, who I idolized, he wanted to go out to town for something. So he says to me, you come with me. We're going to go get whatever. So I said, yes, sir. So in the car with him, alone, he drives me out of the park. We go out to the highway. He gets going down the highway, and all of a sudden, he pulls the car over. And I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know what's happening. So I'm just sitting there, and he looks over at me, and he says, you love my daughter? I said, yes, sir, I do. And he said, you kids are maybe trying to plan a future at this point. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, son, you have my blessing. And I said, okay, that's fantastic. I would have asked, before I had do anything like that, but I really appreciate it, And he reached under the seat, and he pulled out a .357 Magnum, and he put it on the dashboard. There's nowhere to lie. And he looked at me. He said, I just want you to know something. If you hurt my daughter, I will kill you. There's no question that I will kill you dead if you ever hurt my daughter. And he said, I love you. Don't get me wrong. I love you, but I will kill you. And I almost shit in his front seat. I had never even seen a gun before, and not like that. And he said, do you understand me, son? I said, yes, sir, I certainly do. And he took the gun down off the dashboard and put it back under the seat, and we drove to the store and got the shit and went back to the park. And and that was it for me. That was something I wasn't really expecting to happen, and I when they left, I just stopped. That was the thing that actually precipitated my first exit from the band and from the States. That it was after that I started to really rethink where I was and the way that people act there, and it just it queered the whole deal for me in a strange way, because you know, that was probably the worst thing you could have done to me with my background, is pull a gun out and threaten me. Because it instantly just took me back to my childhood. And so it wasn't much longer after that I looked at Enoch one day, maybe a couple months later, and I said, Pop, I got to go home. It's time for me to go back. I'm too homesick to stay here. And he was like, really, son? Are you sure? I said, yeah, I think it's time for me to go back. And they didn't want me to go back, but so I left some of my instruments there, took my guitar and my fiddle, I think, and we went up and played a festival in North Carolina at Bass Mountain River Park. The Bass Mountain Boys, great bluegrass band. And went up there and played, and I ended up hitching a ride. The Country Gentlemen were there. Charlie Waller and the Boys. What a great band. One of the great classic bluegrass bands of all time. And Enoch and Emmett were there. Emmett knew them. Enoch knew them. Enoch went over to Charlie Waller and said, do you think you guys are going north from here, are you? And they said, yeah, as a matter of fact, we are playing right up on the Canada line in New York State. And Enoch said, would you mind giving my boy here a ride up to the border? And Charlie said, yes, boy, sure we will. And that's how I got home. I got on the bus with Charlie and the crew. We left there. We drove all night. The next morning, they dropped me off. I had a great time on that bus. It was really fun. So I got to sit there and talk to Charlie, and everybody was really laid back. And I remember we even stopped and picked up a different driver. Like, they had drivers all over the country. So, one guy they had two drivers in the same town on these certain routes, and so they'd stop and drop one guy off at his house, and then another guy from the same town would jump on the bus and drive the rest of the leg. And it was really cool to watch it all go down. So they drove me all the way to the border, and I walked across the border. Enoch had given me a bit of money, and I walked across the border, got back in the country. I don't know how the hell I did. I didn't even have a passport then. All I had was a driver's license, possibly. I don't even remember if I had a birth certificate on me. Got across the border, went to the train station, took the train station to Halifax, and that's how I got home. And so going home was a culture shock all over again. And as soon as I got there, I realized I didn't really want to be there. But I was running from this other situation. I didn't want to be there either. So I basically ended up, I went back to Mom's place, and that was not working for me anymore. After you've been away from a situation like her, and you go out and live your life like a semi-normal person, you can't go back to that shit. It's not possible. You can't do it. And so I ended up going into Halifax and basically living with my brother Dave at his house, and ended up going to work for a security company. There was a whole bunch of little weird jobs I had in the early part of my life that I wanted. I needed money, and I couldn't make it playing music enough to playing music. So I took a job at a security company, and lied about my age again. I was 18. I needed to be 19 to get my license, my guard license. So I lied and got the guard license, went to work for them. And meantime, Dave saw my presence as a way to to play music live. Because he missed it. He was a carpenter by trade, working in Halifax there. Bob and Joe were just living across, a mile away at this place called the Marina. It was a big boarding house type place. Huge old house, used to be a hospital. Beautiful, beautiful old place, And it was, people had, there was a shared kitchen there, and everybody had these beautiful big rooms. And Bob and Joe were both living there. And Dave got a renovation job renovating this place for a group of Buddhists. So he built a Buddhist temple in the basement of this place and then renovated the whole place. And he hired Bob and Joe. So it ended up the four of us were just sort of hanging out in Halifax, and me and Dave decided that we would start a band. So we did, and we hired one of the great musicians to come out of Nova Scotia, great teacher and great man, Ken Davidson Sr. We hired him as a bass player, and we started a trio, and we actually started to get gigs. I think we actually, if I can't remember correctly, we ended up hooking up with an agent in Halifax named Marcel Cloutier. I think we worked with him the first time, I'm pretty sure. And we started to get pretty good gigs. Like we went at one time and opened for Jimmy Flynn, who was a massive act. It still is, but then he was like incredible. He did so many huge corporate gigs, it was just ridiculous. And I remember opening for him at this massive corporate gig, like I think it was dentists or something. 1,000 people in the ballroom in the Delta Halifax, and opening the show for him, and then standing, finishing our set and getting down and watching him. The guy was a brilliant comedian and musician, still is. Like Jimmy Flynn's the man. And then from there, we ended up getting a steady gig at the Delta Barrington. This hotel had a lounge in the basement, and somehow we got in there. Dave bought a good sound system on time from Music Stop in Halifax, which is now Long and McQuaid, and we ended up working at this place 5 nights a week. And by the time we were done, by the time we were finished working that place, we had our pay up to $2,200 a week for a 3-piece band. And we were very popular. And Dave was smart that way. Dave negotiated our pay and our pay raises, and because he knew all about how to work a bar or a lounge or whatever, a club, for multiple nights, how to keep it going and going and going, and so that's what we did, and it was a lot of fun. And of course, I had a song each night. I did a Lightfoot song called Song for Winter's Night, and Dave used to call it the Song from Hell because I could never remember the lyrics. No matter how many times I nailed it in rehearsal, I would always forget the lyrics. And so I went from this world where I was, basically doing everything I'd ever dreamed of as a musician, and a whole other society. It was just not the same as home at all. And I had taken on a lot of their values. Like I was an upright guy. Like I really took that part of it to heart. It made me be, the way they were made me be, a good guy. Always try to be honest, upright, forthright, get the job done. Don't bullshit people. Just say things the way they are, which is a little strange because the Southern people, they beat around the bush a lot. They don't like to come right out and say things, whether positive or negative, especially negative. They'll beat around the bush forever trying to say something that they want to say that's not pleasant. And that sort of worked the opposite on me. I ended up actually being really forthright, but honest. I wanted to be honest. And So I was coming out of that world back into playing clubs, around alcohol, around like I had been away from alcohol for a year. I hadn't seen any because that was down there. We lived in a dry county. You couldn't get any alcohol anywhere around there. You'd have to drive way down the road 40 miles to a wet county to get beer. So I had been away from alcohol for a year, which was really weird. I found I didn't miss it. I didn't care. And but so here I was back in the thick of it, back in the clubs, back in the, doing that life. And so, yeah, it didn't last very long. Didn't last long. Things started to happen, but we'll get into that next week. But me and Dave and Ken Davidson Sr., boy, we did have a good time. It was a good band. Dave had great material. I got to play a lot of guitar, and it was a lot of fun. And people that saw us, really enjoyed the shows. They were different. We were a different crew than your normal, what do you do with a drunken sailor band that was going around at those times, right? So, yeah, but I still remember all the angst every night right before singing this Lightfoot song. It was horrendous how often I screwed the lyrics on this thing. And but it was still one of my favorite songs. Can't help it. Is burning low upon my tabletop. The snow is softly falling. The air is still in the silence of my room. I hear your voice softly calling. If I could only have you near to breathe a sigh or two, I would be happy just to hold the hands I love on this winter night with you. The smoke is rising in the shadows overhead. My glass is almost empty. Again between the lines upon the page, the words of love you sent me. If I could know within my heart that you were lonely too, I would be happy just to hold the hands I love on this winter night with you. Fire is dying now, my lamp is growing dim. The shades of night are lifting. The morning light steals across my window pane, where webs of snow are drifting. If I could know within my heart that you were lonely too, I would be happy just to hold the hands I love, and to be once again with you, to be once again with you.